Okay, great. Thank you. All right, you guys, if you want to get started, go for it.
So Sue, are you asking us to start before your
Yes, I thought you said
treasurer's report and so on? Okay,
you wanted to go first, right?
it's up to you, but we're happy to do so.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, gonna share the screen, so give me just a moment here. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes.
Okay, good. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Barrett. I'm from an organization called the Safe Community Project, and we have multiple divisions throughout Southern California. We work with fire departments throughout the state. For those of you that don't know us, we are a longtime member of the city family. As a partner, we take no money from the fire department, but we have been their resilience and education and training partner since 2008. I have a lot of feelings about Pacific Palisades. I lived up there for a while, and the house I lived in is gone on Lower Bienvenida. And I have some friends that live up there, and not just up in ABC streets in the Highlands, but also in the mobile home estates. And as you know, all of those are gone. Our presentation tonight is designed to help us point this group forward on things that can be very helpful moving into the future. There's some things that you already know about that I'm going to quickly touch on. It's not designed to say, hey, you need to learn from me about this, but it's simply a matter of creating some clarity and helping us get to the point we want to get to. And if we'll, hopefully I can get through this in about 15, 18 minutes. We definitely want you to be able to ask questions. If you want to enter them in the chat, Dante can take a look at them. If you prefer to wait and use the hand raise function and talk to us about that, that would be fun as well. So overall, our presentation today is really about moving forward. And what does that entail? Everyone's concerned about it in one way, shape, or form. First of all, and one of the things that we use in these presentations is QR codes. So if you have a phone and you want to grab something for later use, just point your phone at the QR code and it'll open up the link for you there. I will also make the presentation available to Sue, and if she wants to share it with everyone, she can do that. But this is a way to stay in touch with our wildfire website, which has a lot of information ranging from ready, set, go to rebuilding and recovery and so on. So good place to start. So these are topics that I'm going to cover in the next 15, 18 minutes. Who is in the very high fire severity zone? There is some confusion about that. A little bit about defensible space in LA. Some of the key reasons why home hardening is important. Why also is the California Fire Safe Council important, and why should you guys continue moving forward with that? We started on the path with Sue and a number of other residents in late October, and we were just a little too late in getting organized, but we want to continue moving forward now. We'll explain to you a little bit about what My Safe LA is doing relative to at-risk communities and wildfire mitigation, and how working with us can be helpful moving into the future. So first of all, the very high fire severity zone. This is something that I'm sure everyone has heard 100,000 times during the last couple of months, and certainly before that. So the Palisades is in an LAFD mapped fire hazard zone. However, the Palisades is not in the CAL FIRE very high fire severity zone map. And those maps are different, and they have different implications relative to not only insurance, but how brush is cleared, how different agencies respond. And that might be important as we get a little bit deeper into this. So there is a difference between those two maps. CAL FIRE has been actively working on remapping for the first time in 15 years. And the new very high fire severity zone maps will be released next week on March the 24th. So you'll have a chance to see them then. And I would be very surprised if the entire Malibu, Pacific Palisades, Brentwood area is not within at least the high fire severity zone. So another thing to note is that the LAFD's brush clearance is limited to areas they designate as a very high fire severity zone. So if they don't do that, then it's not necessary to do some of the mitigation, 200 feet and so on and so forth. It's still important. And one of the issues about that kind of clearance is it minimum or is it maximum? And we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. So brush clearance is definitely a challenge. And you guys have known that for a long time. We've toured in many places. We've gone up by Sue Cole's house. We've gone all the way up to the top of Palisades Drive, and we've looked around in other places throughout. And it's complicated, right? So you have the county, you have the city, Coastal Commission, California State Parks, landowners, Santa Monica Conservancy. And the problem is that everyone's kind of pointing fingers at everyone. I mean, historically, pointing fingers at everyone else. Jennifer Gray Thompson, some of you may know, she's the chief executive for a rebuilding organization called After the Fire USA. If you guys don't know about her, you should definitely check them out. They're very, very good at helping people for after the fire, for rebuilding and so on. And she's got this quote here: you have state lands next to federal lands, next to private lands, and historically it has been incredibly difficult for those there to work together. And one of the things we're going to talk about doing is creating more clarity and getting some action done to make sure that you don't have to raise your own money to try and clear a hillside and pay the fee and get permission and so on and so forth. So we want to talk about that. Defensible space. So you guys have heard a lot about defensible space and home hardening. I'm going to talk about it briefly, but the idea here is, again, to create some clarity about how and why. So defensible space is not designed to stop a wildfire from occurring. We're just not going to do that. Wildfires are part of nature, they're part of the ecosystem, and they are going to happen. But the key is to slow them down enough so that firefighters can get ahead of the issue, so that they have a chance to set up defensible positions, to attack the fire, and to prevent it from turning into something other than a wildfire. So in the Palisades, as you know, what started as a wildfire on the morning of the 7th of January was no longer a wildfire by late afternoon, right? It was no longer a wildfire. It was an urban conflagration. It's a very different kind of a fire. And we want to make sure when we're dealing with defensible space that the objective is to prevent a wildfire from becoming anything other than a wildfire. So reducing the spread, the intensity, the heat, and protecting homes and structures from ignition. Those are the two key most important things. It also is about providing safe access for firefighters so they have some place to work from. Of course, there's all the compliance issues. And ultimately, it's going to help with property values and with insurance eligibility, even for those homes that did not burn in the Palisades. And of course, as everyone rebuilds, we want to keep that in mind as well. There's been a lot of questions about defensible space methodologies, right? So there's mechanical thinning where you use like chippers and that sort of thing. There's animals, goats and sheep and that sort of thing. And people have asked a lot of us about controlled burns. Can we do controlled burns? And why don't we do them any longer in Los Angeles? So here's a couple of reasons why we don't. Historically, the fire suppression policies in LA have been to put out every single fire immediately. And that interferes with prescribed burns. Regulatory and environmental concerns. There's a lot of restrictive policy in place throughout the state of California, particularly as you get close to urban centers. And that means that urbanization and air quality become a big issue. Climate change, meaning increased wind flow, longer heat cycles, longer wet cycles in the winter. Now, keep in mind that we're talking about the changing climate. We're not talking about the cause of the changing climate. So this is an apolitical statement. Our climate currently is different than it was 20 years ago. That's just a fact. So the fact that we have these longer, hotter, drier seasons means it's a little bit more difficult to do it. And of course, there's liability and public perception. Anytime you're driving anywhere near the Palisades or Malibu, if you saw a column of smoke, you're going to assume there's a fire. So even if it's prescribed, that becomes a risk. And I want to share something about an area that does do prescribed burns, because maybe that will be helpful to you. The County of Ventura, which is one of our partners, The Ventura Fire Safe Council is a ad hoc work group partner of ours. They can do prescribed burns, but it has taken them 5 years to get all the red tape organized and stuff so that they could do it. They've been doing it for the last 4 years or so. And even then, how the wind blows and how the temperature blows affects their ability to do it. So there have been days when they've had their bulldozers, their fire apparatus, their helicopters, everything ready to go, and they've had to cancel because of the direction of the wind. And so everyone has to be kind of cautious about that. In Ventura, if the wind is blowing to the east, there will be no prescribed burns because the smoke will go right over Ventura, Camarillo, and on into Westlake and so on, Thousand Oaks. If it's blowing to the west towards the water, then it's possible to do prescribed burns. The other aspect, which I didn't list up here, but it's just as important, is prescribed burns are not taking out a hillside. They're not about eliminating brush overall. They're about creating controlled areas that have been cleared. And usually it's like a mosaic. So if you have an area that looks like a puzzle piece or that looks like a pattern on a carpet, that would be something that you would want to clear. And you would put those in strategic areas throughout a community. One of the really important things about prescribed burns in Ventura is that their structure loss results from wildfires until the mountain fire this past fall were very, very low because in part of prescribed burns. So it's something that makes a lot of sense. And the problem is in LA, there's so many roadblocks currently, and we may be able to make some changes, and I'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. But right now, prescribed burns are such an uphill battle that they don't necessarily create the proper return on investment, that there are other ways that we can achieve similar results. I know people have talked about using goats and sheep, and we're talking about mechanized chipper days and other kinds of things, but we want to look at how can we cost effectively do this. And if we do another presentation for you, we're going to talk about some new retardant technologies, which may be just as good as brush clearance. So I'm pretty excited about what's happening from a technology point of view. Before we move on into home hardening, it's important to remind everyone, this is like, I hate this part of a presentation the most because it's hard to accept, but it's very, very important. What is most flammable? What is the most flammable thing that occurs in our communities? Is it trees? Is it brush? What is it that burns the fastest and the quickest? And the answer is grass. Grass can move at up to 40, 50 miles an hour or more, depending on the wind. Grass turns into embers very quickly, and it is extremely flammable. It could be very wet and look like it's lush and ready to go, and 2 or 3 days later, it can be dead and dried out and be ready to burn. So it's extremely dangerous overall. So what's the second most flammable component in our communities? And you guys all know the answer. It's buildings. Buildings will burn faster and are more likely to ignite than brush or trees. Trees, the branches will burn, but the trees themselves often don't. And if you drive through your community, if you drive through Altadena, if you look through any historical area, you'll see a lot of trees are still standing. So it's important for us to think about this. And the reason why is, let's assume we're talking about defensible space for a moment. How often do we have to do that? Well, we have to do it every year pretty much. But if our homes are designed to have lower ignitability, we probably only have to do that every 10 to 20 years. So there's a value in reducing the ignitability of our home. And if embers cannot get into your home, it's not going to burn. If embers can get into your home, whether it's through the foundation or through the attic or through any kind of an opening, house is going to burn. So we have to think about those things as we move forward. So when we talk about home hardening, and everyone's going to want to know much more about this in terms of contractors and designers and insurance, the resistance to wind-driven embers is very, very important. Now, that's not a wildfire. When we get to the urban conflagration point of view, then what we're worried about is radiant heat and direct flame impingement. But structural survivability, very, very important. There are homes still standing in both Altadena and in the Palisades that were survivable. It's also important to note that the time to get out and the time to get firefighters in is improved if your home is hardened. And notwithstanding the fire you've just all tragically experienced, but the opportunity to save money related to insurance costs and to improve your eligibility, those are all directed things from home hardening. And I would tell you that one of the changes that's coming, and there's no way around it, is in order to be insured, we're going to be much more like Florida. So Florida, you're not getting insured if your home is not set up as defendable against a hurricane. That's just the way it is in Florida and in several other states as well. In California, we're going to have to deal with wildfire the same way. If we're not taking some of the steps listed here in home hardening, it's going to be very difficult to get insurance. And that's something that concerns me a lot and that we're working on diligently to try and find some answers for. So I'm going to just jump through this. You know about, I'm sure you know about before retrofitting the zones, zone 0, zone 1, and zone 2, what those things relate to. And then what happens after retrofitting, a Class A roof, nothing in zone 0 that is flammable, making sure that you have composite decks, metal fences, nothing that's flammable leaning against the house, no leaves in your gutters, all that kind of stuff. We have a lot of information about this on our website, and we also provide free wildfire assessments. So if you are at a place where there is a structure that needs to be inspected, we can come and do that for you and give you a report, and that's free. There's no charge for doing that. All of what I just shared leads to the concept of a fire safe council. We develop fire safe councils and NFPA Firewise sites, both of them designed to make a community stronger so that it is able to reduce its ignitability, create defendable space, qualify for insurance discounts, and more. Currently in Los Angeles, we've got 18 Firewise sites in development. We've got 4 that Firewise councils, fire safe councils that have already been established, and we're working on another 4, and hopefully the Palisades will be the 5th. So some of the benefits about becoming a fire safe council. It empowers communities to reduce the risk as a community. And that's really important. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but community is really the key to everything. The access to grant funding for wildfire prevention. If you guys were already a fire safe council, you would be able to apply for literally several $1 million of money related to creating more strong community resilience against wildfire. You would be able to apply for grants related to rebuilding. In some cases you can, because for those of you that have had homes damaged or destroyed, you enter a certain kind of qualification. But generally speaking, a fire safe council is going to give you access to a wider array of grants from foundations, from the federal government, from the state, and so on. There's, of course, stronger collaboration with fire departments and other agencies. Right now, if you go and you represent yourself, even as the Palisades CC, then you have the idea of, well, what do they know about wildfire? You have people who have the potential to discount you, to not give you as much credence and respectability as you deserve. And being a fire safe council is a nationally recognized term for a group that knows what they're doing. And of course, it makes the community better prepared. It also reduces wildfire insurance costs, and it can increase your property values, and we'll talk about that more. But the most important benefit, the thing that is, in our view, the magic Willy Wonka ticket to the chocolate factory is, and without a question, it's community. Working together in a group can greatly elevate your stature and your clout, even in simple things. So for example, in dealing with Army Corps of Engineers for clearing out debris, if you were able to organize a group of 10 or 15 or 20 homeowners adjacent to each other and deal with the Army Corps of Engineers as a single entity of homeowners, they would be able to move much faster. And for example, we know that the Army Corps of Engineers has had tremendous difficulty getting through the phase 1 clearance with the mobile home park, with the pre-manufactured home park. The owner there is not supportive. And if you were a fire safe council, you'd have a little bit more clout in pushing the owner to do what is necessarily right. That's not a guarantee that that would happen. I'm simply saying that you would have a little bit more energy and clout at the state and local level. So if you plan together about how do we not let this happen again? How do we make sure that when it does happen again, because wildfires happen, that we don't lose as many homes and that we are evacuated in a more orderly manner and all of those issues so that you can survive together, right? Community, planning, surviving, all of those things are linked together. So here's how our organization helps and how we can help you. Our objectives overall are to reduce the losses, to assist and promote the creation of fire safe councils and NFPA Firewise sites, and to connect communities together for a coordinated wildfire prevention and response initiative. We've made a number of your neighbors fire safe councils already, the Brentwood Homeowners Association, the Bel Air Crest Homeowners Association. We're working with Mandeville Canyon. There's a number of other areas close by. And we're also doing work throughout the city, including in the most dangerous part of the city, which is the Hollywood Hills. If a weather event like the one that you experienced were to take place in the Hollywood Hills and there was an ignition, it would be unthinkable. And just as what happened in the Palisades was unthinkable. And we want to make sure that we just try and stay away from that. Since we've been working with the city and with the LA Fire Department since 2008, but in 2021, we started a new initiative working together called the Los Angeles Wildfire Resilience Alliance. And as partners, we're able to work together very closely on a number of different initiatives, including risk reduction. And we've had a tremendous amount of results. The new fire chief, who you see here, Ronnie Villanueva, he's worked with us for almost 20 years. He knows us very well. We know him very well. And I think you're going to see some very positive things. Although he's currently the interim chief, that probably lasts for at least a year. And we'll see what happens after that. But he is on the ground running to make important changes that benefit the entire city. Support-wise, we'll get you across the finish line being a fire safe council. Our people will work to make sure that you have the support that you need to become one. We will provide ongoing collaboration in your fire prevention efforts, organizing chipper days and other kinds of clearance, making sure your fire roads are good, making sure that the gates and access all have the right locks and the right process, that Rec and Parks is supporting you properly. We are plugged into all of these city departments, and as such, they know us and we know them. So that gives us some ability to make some things go. I am in Sacramento all the time, and I will advocate for what's going on for you when we talk with elected officials at the state and federal level. Just met with Congresswoman Rivas last week. I have other congressional and Senate meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks. It's something that's very important to us, and it's a way that we can help you. We can go and we can take your issues there, we can discuss them, and we can bring the results back, and you can discuss them as part of your wildfire committee as a fire safe council within the PPCC. We're also, and I think this is very important as well, we can be a source for accurate and useful information. There is, as you guys know, a lot of unanswered questions. There's a lot of misinformation. It's hard to know what's true. And that's not just related to the wildfire. That seems to be an issue in our culture these days. But as it relates to fire overall, we can be a resource for you. I'd also like to mention Rebuild LA. This is our podcast on not just rebuilding the Palisades or Altadena, but the city. Because one of the biggest challenges that the entire city faces is an aging infrastructure, right? An outdated, antiquated water supply. I mean, I would tell you right now that the water system in Los Angeles was never designed to fight a wildfire of the size and scope in the Palisades. So if the reservoirs were full, if all the hydrants pumped at full pressure, there would not have been much of a difference. But there should be a difference, and there should be a way in which you have a lot more pressure, particularly in at-risk areas in canyons. The LADWP is working on that. They have a new resilience plan underway. They're allocating a lot of money to improving things. And so this is an opportunity to make that happen. This podcast is about that kind of infrastructure as well as rebuilding and survival. So we've had great guests in just the past 5 weeks. NASA, NOAA, the NFPA, a number of elected officials, wildfire survivors. We're producing great information about how to reduce the chance of another fire, about how to make sure that your building goes smoothly and that you don't run into issues related to planning and roadblocks like that. It's unfiltered. So our guests tell it like it is. There's no political preference. If people are mad, they can say that they're angry and they can explain why and how, and they can share their opinions. And it's free. So there's no cost to listen, learn, and share. This QR code will take you directly to it. It's available through almost every streaming service, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, anything that you can imagine related to podcast distribution. It's very, very popular. It's a good listen if you're driving to work or you're making dinner or something along those lines. And I would highly recommend that you check it out as appropriate. And finally, our organization is building the first ever community wildfire protection plan for Los Angeles. This is something we've been working on for a year. It will be done this year, hopefully before the summer. And what's important about it is it aligns all of the different things that exist, the city's plans versus the state plans. How does the fire department respond? How is an evacuation managed? What's invasive about certain plants and how do they take over a community? Is that just because they're invasive or is it because there was a wildfire and nobody properly replanted? What are the issues that go on? And by putting all of these together into a single document, we have the opportunity to align local, state, and federal agencies so that fire can be properly managed in the Los Angeles region. It also reduces the wildfire risk in the largest WUI, and it's so big that we call it the wild and urban intermix rather than just an interface, because everything is like fingers interwoven together. It's not like one butted up against the other. Everything's mixed, right? So it prioritizes fuel reduction and defensible space projects. It unlocks funding and grant opportunities. Notwithstanding what's going on right now, the U.S. Forest Service will provide grants up to $10 million to a community that has an active CWPP, and Los Angeles doesn't have one. So as soon as this is done, we're going to be able to see the opportunities for fire safe councils like yours to apply for millions of dollars through this single program, not to mention all the other programs that may be available. So if we're talking about public safety, evacuation planning, community preparedness, the CWP is extremely important. The CWPP is extremely important. And there'll be two versions of it. There will be the full book that most people won't want to read because it's so dense. But then there will be an online version, which is full of video clips and short storytelling and the ability to go look at other references and things if you want to do that. And that will be easily readable and enjoyable by anybody living anywhere in the city. So we've done a lot, and we continue to do a lot. Our uniformed people are first responders, but we're all focused on prevention and recovery. So we want you to be able to use this as a reference. As I've said at the beginning, we're building fire safe councils and firewise sites throughout Los Angeles. We do monthly virtual meetings, town halls where we bring in guests to talk about various things. We do free wildfire assessments. And we do wildfire safety fairs. We were planning one for February of this year. I still think we should do one, and it should be a recovery fair in which we can help people get through that process. But it's all just part of who we are and what we do as an organization. So here's what's next. I think that if you guys agree, you should formalize a committee for wildfire. You have a number of committees already. You even have a recovery committee. So if you can take the time to think about building a wildfire resilience committee that becomes a fire safe council, that would be fantastic. Conduct a meeting with us on the process and how that works, and then allow us at whether it's the next or at some point in time in the near future to have another presentation, which is providing you with feedback on the Palisades fire exposure. Why did everything burn the way that it did? And how do we make that less possible in the future? What are the insurance issues that are ongoing and how do we deal with admitted versus unadmitted insurance carriers? Rebuilding expertise on the process there and response to your questions. So if we do this, you'll have an opportunity to submit all the questions that you want and we will chase them down so that we can give you good, accurate, honest answers. Then, once you've done that, we can create a 5-year threat analysis related to wildfire, help you build a 3-year action plan, and then we'll take all of that to Sacramento and ask them to help you more directly. So that's what we do. That's a quick overview of all the stuff that we do. And if you have questions or there's anything that I can add or that Dante can add to this, yeah, and there's a question here, by the way, just before I get started, is do we have information on the FEMA hazard mitigation program? Anyone who has been turned down by the SBA or by FEMA in your applications, the next step is to reapply immediately. They're dealing with fewer people and they're trying to get through this as quickly as they can. And they are sticky about making sure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed. So they may turn people down simply because a signature is missing or because some little element hasn't been provided. That's a little bit separate than the hazard mitigation program, but overall, don't let FEMA saying no be the end of the day. Take that no and tell them, no, you made a mistake. It needs to be a yes. And if you have questions about what to do about that, send us an email or get in touch with us and we will give you feedback that could possibly help you. We deal with FEMA on multiple levels, primarily related to fire safety and prevention. So if anyone else has questions, we'll let Sue moderate, but feel free to ask any questions that you may have and we'll try and answer them.
Okay, well, I see that Chris has her hand up, but I'll just ask one question and also ask you, David, if you could put your email address in the chat so that people will have that. I'm just curious on your website and in this booklet that you described that's so thick or anywhere else, seeing as how we're all on the cusp of a rebuild over the next 2 or 3 years, do you have products listed in there? I know you can't promote any certain products, but do you have certain things listed in there that we should be reading and giving to our contractors and asking and just telling them that when they rebuild, we are going to require that they include, these 10 things? Because I know there are products out there. I've been getting a lot of emails about them.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Sue. And so the 3-part answer is we're building a brochure that can be given to any contractor that talks about the state requirements, the best kinds of building materials and how that works. We're also, keep in mind, there's 2 things going on too. And Sue mentioned rebuilding, but there's homes that are still standing and there are homes around you and neighborhoods around you where the fire didn't directly impact them that really need to pay attention to all of this as well. The older the home, the more likely it is to be at risk, but we want to make sure that we're helping with that. So one of the things we're doing is we're developing a video. It's all been shot, just needs to have the editing completed on what a properly hardened home looks like. It's being done with Cal OES. And in fact, it's being done with the executive director of Wildfire's home. He lives in Altadena and his home was not burned down. But it's a great example of how to take an existing home and to harden it over time. We hope to have that brochure available within about a month to 5 weeks. One of the challenges there, Sue, is we don't want to be in our own little silo. So as we have developed this, we're making sure that contractors, the state and city all take a look at it and make sure that we're not saying anything that's inappropriate. But it's going to be a very helpful thing to give to any contractor, not just related to roofing and siding and the architectural structure, but also related to the interior, to what your kitchen should be like and what anything related to a fireplace or anything that burns and how that should be implemented. And the final thing that I would say about that, Sue, is we're very happy to organize or to support a safety fair where we bring a lot of these people together. This is something that we've been doing all over the city. And so bringing together all of those folks that have the proper materials to share and what that means. As an adjunct to that, we're working on creating a demonstration. It will probably be in early May of a new product. It's a retardant that is clear. It has no odor. It's visually completely transparent. It's very inexpensive, and it is 99.5% fire resistant. If you spray it onto paper, the paper won't ignite, and it lasts for about 5 to 6 months. If you wanted to put retardant on your home, most of the retardant-based companies, and those retardants are only active when they're wet, you might spend as much as $12,000 or $15,000 for a 3,000 square foot home on a 6,000 square foot lot. Completely protecting the home is about $600. So it's a very affordable solution. We want to do a demonstration to prove its viability, but stuff like that can be a terrific intermediate step as you're evolving things forward. Keep in mind, the state fire marshal has been directed by the governor to complete with the Forest Service the Zone 0 requirements for new and existing structures, and by the end of the year to make enforcement of that required. We are gathering data, so if you're interested in providing feedback about Zone 0, if you go to the website that we set up at the very beginning, and I can put that up there again if you want, you'll have a chance to be able to weigh in on whether you think Zone 0 is properly organized or what you change about it.
Okay. Thank you. Look
I know
forward to
that was
seeing all that
long-winded.
info. Chris, do you have your hand up?
Yes, hi. Thank you, David, for your presentation. All this
Sure.
information is so important. So I happen to know Brentwood Homeowner Association members, and they formed their own Fire Safe Council in Brentwood, which has been very successful, as I
Yes,
understand.
we did that for them.
Right. So PPCC is its own entity. We don't typically like form another entity under our aegis. I mean, and committees are different. They're advisory only. They don't have a lot of authority. So my guess is if people here wanted to form a fire safe council, it would have to be separate from PPCC. Is that allowed? Let's say PPCC members plus other residents wanted to form a fire safe council. Would that be possible?
So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is it can be anything that you want it to be. So if you're going to be a fire safe council, it needs to be a nonprofit organization. However, if you want to be an
there, it has to be a nonprofit with the state. So something would have to be formed. Another entity would have to be formed.
if you're not a nonprofit, you have to become either a 501c3 or a 501c4. Yes.
Okay, all right, that answers that. Okay, thank you.
But however, the second part is if you want to become an NFPA Firewise community, the main difference being that it doesn't have the same grant outreach because you're not a nonprofit. But there's a number of other benefits, and you could be a Firewise community as the PPCC. All you need to do is form a committee, and you already have committees. So you could do that under the aegis, and I like that word. I'll tell you that next week we're going to announce a new smartphone or a tablet application designed to manage your rebuilding and your home hardening and defensible space and insurance. It's going to be free, and it's called Aegis 365. So that's kind of a cute little thing. But you can easily become an NFPA Firewise, and the only requirement, and Dante, correct me if there's anything you want to add here, is that you have to have a minimum of 8 homes and a maximum of 2,500 homes. But you could have 2 or 3 or 4 NFPA Firewise entities under the auspices of the PPCC. So there's no limitation ultimately. It's just how many homes can be grouped together. Do you want to add to that, Dante? Anything that needs to be added?
No, you pretty much covered it all. Yep.
And I know when you came to us, I think it was September maybe this year, there was a discussion about the Firewise communities. We have that somewhere. We have a recording of that on our website. But thank you.
You're welcome.
Miriam, you have your hand up? Oh, her hand just came down.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Sue. Hi.
Okay.
So thank you, David. Thank you, Dante. You guys might remember, I'm piggybacking on Chris's comment. You guys might remember that a few months ago, the Marquez Knolls Property Owners Association asked you to come and talk to them. MKPOA is a 501c3, and I thought, I had heard you guys, Sue and I had met you a couple of years ago. CD11 brought together a group of people. Then when we talked, I think it was Carl We were informed that Fire Safe Council is very interested in Pacific Palisades because we were at risk, which we now very much understand. So we took you to MKPOA to talk about maybe Marquez Knolls becoming a Fire Safe Council. And I think it was a great idea, but it took a while for people to get it, dare I say, like understand the value, understand the steps we needed to take. What is it that we had to do? It was a slow learning curve. Is there anything you can do to quicken that learning curve? I mean, it might naturally be quicker now, but is there anything you can do to help us understand exactly what step to take in order to become that council? You know, does that mean that each and every home in an area has to do something or take some steps? Just help us understand practically what those steps are.
Yeah, so let me find the screen here. So when we talk about what's next, which is right here, a meeting with MySafeLA on process, we will lay that all out and give you a document that allows you to see what's going on. We're also building an online Fire Safe Council 101 class that will be available to anyone to take. And the process for applying will also be online, so you can work on it as a group to make that process easier. I think you've touched on something very important, though, which is we could come in and we could demonstrate how quickly a home will burn down, and 10% of the people would be interested. We have so many things going on in our lives that it's very difficult to get people to be committed, particularly if there are renters or if people have, you know, they live there 20% or 30% of the year. When we have a big earthquake, anything above a magnitude 4, the sale of earthquake materials goes through the roof for about 3 weeks, and then it disappears. If there's a wildfire, the same kind of thing happens relative to interest in wildfire community protection. I can tell you that during the last 6 weeks, our phone has rung off the hook, not only with new entities, but with people we've been talking to for several years who've gone, you know, we're good. And all of a sudden they're like, maybe we're not good. So it's important to make sure that we focus on community. Often you'll hear someone say, I did all the fire safety stuff from my house, but my neighbor across the street or my neighbor next door. All of these things lead us to believe how important community is. So the more that we can work on community, the more that we can get that messaging across so that it's not just us talking about it, but it's people who live there talking about it, the more likely we are to be able to create a successful community in a reasonable period of time.
Okay, thank you. Leanne?
So I had two questions for David, because I hear what you're saying. Only 10% of the people might get the message when you meet with a group. I'm in an area that does not have an HOA. Do you think it's valuable for me to form some type of group to make it happen for my neighborhood on the El Medio Bluffs?
So for that, let's have Dante respond to you because he's really good he's our captain and supervisor for wildfire mitigation. And Dante, maybe you can explain how an ad hoc group of homeowners can get together.
Yeah, so if you don't have an HOA, I mean, you can, go back after this meeting and kind of discuss with your neighbors and kind of see who's interested. And you can become a Firewise community within yourself and your neighbors, and you guys can develop your own little Firewise group. And then you guys would become your own like little ad hoc group. And then from there, I could work with you guys into developing a Firewise community within however many homes or however many people are interested in that. So that's kind of a nice distinction between the California Fire Safe Council versus Firewise is you don't have to be part of an HOA or a POA or whatnot. It could just be just a group of homeowners that want to reduce their risk. And I can help you guys through the process of becoming a Firewise community, and kind of developing your little fire board in terms of how to educate each other and kind of how to find other information. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. Would you try to segment it to a certain number of homes?
So it's at minimum of
8?
yes, yeah, at minimum of 8.
And I think the best thing to do there is to start with a small group and have some success. So if you can get 8 homeowners to agree to collaborate on this, then when your neighbors see that you've done well, then you do another 8 or you do 10 or you do 15. I think one of the challenges, particularly for residents that are not part of an HOA, is who is first in the boat, right? Who's
Yeah.
going to step up to begin with? And if you can see that there's people who have done it and it's working, well, then it's a lot easier for other people to go, all right, I'm ready to go. And that's, that's a cultural thing. That's part of our society.
And the second question is, do I hear you correctly that I should not plant grass? I do have a neighbor that had all lava rocks and her vegetation did very well. And that was one small takeaway from your presentation.
No, if that's how it came across, I should make sure that I adjust that. Zone 0, which is the edge of the foundation of any structure out 5 feet, should not have anything flammable in it. But that doesn't mean you can't have a lawn. In fact, I saw several properties in the Palisades where the building was just a chimney, yet the front lawn was green. So grass in and of itself, and by the way, that's an indication, of course, that if the grass is wet and well watered and well taken care of, that reduces risk. So yeah, you can have grass. You just need to make sure that that 5-foot area all around your home, it doesn't necessarily have to be barren. Some people have done really nice with paving stones, volcanic rock,
Yeah.
and things can grow in volcanic rock. So if you have succulents that are interspersed with some volcanic rock or with pavers or with other things, there's ways to make it attractive, but you just don't want to have vegetation, firewood, plants that, who knows where they come from, and all that sort of stuff piled up. In fact, I would tell you one of the interesting things in our film that we're making with Cal OES, Chief Lopez's house, all of his hoses that are around the house are metal. There's no rubber hoses because they burn. And yet they work
Wow.
just as well, and they don't snag, and they're actually really easy to use, and they're not that expensive. So there's all kinds of things that we can try and do, and many of them don't cost a lot of money.
Thank you so much. I really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
the presentation.
Okay,
Thanks.
sure. We're happy to be here.
Okay, Beth has a question and then Karen.
So I was in the Palos Verdes right after the fire, and somebody said their buddy was a firefighter who wanted to save homes, but like literally the hydrants didn't have water in them. So are you guys monitoring the water in our hydrants going forward?
So it's a good question, and there's a couple of things that we should address about that. And if I say something that seems obvious and that you already know, forgive me. I'm not attempting to talk down to anyone. Fire hydrants don't hold water. They're just connected to the water supply. And fire hydrants have long been an issue. And one of the reasons is that they are managed by multiple sources. So the Los Angeles City Fire Department is responsible for checking on the functionality of fire hydrants. They, as part of their weekly or monthly operations, they have a number of hydrants they'll go check and test, and then they'll report back on that to the department's administration. A lot of things about our fire hydrants have been ignored because of a lack of money in the city. For example, does anyone know how a fire engine, if it's responding somewhere, finds a fire hydrant? The reason that they should be able to do that is that there should be a blue circle in the street next to where every fire hydrant is. But if you drive around your neighborhood a year or 2 or 3 or 10 years ago, I would challenge you to find any blue dots, but they're supposed to be there to help. Separately, the Department of Water and Power is responsible for the actual maintenance of fire hydrants, unless those fire hydrants are in a park, in which case Rec and Parks is responsible for the maintenance of those fire hydrants. So you see, it's kind of complicated, or I should say, perhaps more complicated than it should be. So overall, fire hydrants are really not as much the issue as I'll have a caveat to that, as is making sure that they work properly and that there's good water supply for them. There are a number of areas within the city where there are not fire hydrants, and there should be. And so one of the things our CWPP discusses is the city must invest in making sure that not only are fire hydrants functional, they need to be easily found, and they need to be added into the very high fire severity zone in a way in which they can be properly deployed, not to suppress brush, but to defend homes. And if that can be done, then that will be a big step forward. You may have read that the Department of Water and Power was recently informed. In fact, this is one of the first things that Ronnie Villanueva did when he became the fire chief, was he looked into this and he saw, oh my goodness, there's 1,300 plus fire hydrants that are not operational. And that's up to LADWP to fix. So he and the general manager of DWP are working on a new model utilizing software to make sure that that never happens again. And they are currently working on repairing those 1,300 fire hydrants. I hope that was helpful.
Thank goodness. Okay, Karen?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on Leanne's questions. For a group to form, are they homeowners who are willing to adapt or adopt all of the hardening of their home requirements? Because I do remember taking a test from an insurance company that wanted to cancel my insurance, and the conditions were so severe. And even my agent said, don't even worry about it, Karen. It's just impossible to pass. They just really want to cancel you. And you had to send in $150 for the evaluation to see that I was or was not compliant. And really, I mean, it said you cannot have a living thing plant-wise within maybe 5 feet of the home. And all of our homes have decorative plantings around them that are up against the homes. So when you are asking us to form groups of 8 or 10 or local communities, those who join, what are they buying into as principles of their own personal behavior on their homes? What is it that they are agreeing to do together?
So, Karen, that is an outstanding question. It might be the best question of the month, because it touches on a number of really important issues. So let me try and address them quickly, because I know you have a lot of other things to do tonight, and I want to be able to answer everyone if I can. So first of all, you mentioned something that's really important, which is risk. And what we're talking about overall is buying down risk. How much are you willing to spend to reduce the risk? And that doesn't just mean on hardening your home, it means in your taxes, right? So right now in Los Angeles, everyone's taxes, local taxes, are about $26 a person for the LA Fire Department, for firefighters, for current firefighters. The national standard for fire protection is to have 1.5 firefighters for every 1,000 residents. In Los Angeles, it's 0.7. So we're almost 50% under where we need to be in terms of the number of firefighters. We're not going to change that overnight, but we can change how they work. So there's a lot of ways that we can make that happen. That's part of buying down your risk. So is home hardening. You talked about another thing that's very important. People have decorative plants and shrubbery and things that they feel enhance the beauty and the value of their homes. The bad news is that that's over. If you don't remove them, you will not get insured. It's the end of the road. And it doesn't matter whether you're part of an organized group or not. Insurance companies, and I'll talk about them again in 30 seconds or so, they will block any resident that has anything that they deem to be high risk related to their home burning. And what that also means is that we as a community, we need to work much harder to educate insurance companies, because a lot of them are simply looking at zip codes or evacuation zones or having, discussions about how much money did we lose, what does it cost us. So for every dollar that they earn in California, they typically are paying out $1.20. So they're losing 20 cents for every dollar in terms of their financial model. So they're like, we don't want to do that. Why would we do that? It's just, even if it's the 7th largest market in the world, which it is, why would we do that? So that's why the zone 0 formation is important. So I would say, Karen, if you go to wildfirela.org, right at the very top of the site, it'll say, tell us what you think about zone 0. Click on that and share your thoughts. But I personally believe that you should be able to have some things within zone 0. And some of them, insurance companies would say you shouldn't be there. For example, trees. If it's an aspen tree or if it's a eucalyptus, well, that's like saying you have a Roman candle attached to your house. But if you have an oak or if you have some other kind of a tree that doesn't necessarily burn, I mean, people should be able to understand that. So one of the benefits of becoming an NFPA Firewise site is that that encompasses all the homes who belong. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've done all the things related to home hardening. So taking the effort to fill out the application, to create a 3-year action plan, a 5-year threat analysis, that alone, when your insurance company says, we're not going to continue, you could say, here's my certificate that shows I'm part of a Firewise site. And 9 out of 10 times, insurance companies go, oh, all right, we'll keep you. They may raise the price, but they'll keep you. So it's very valuable to become a member of a Firewise site. And the final thing that I want to say about this is hardening your home is not something that you have to look at like repairing a car that was in an accident. It's more like restoring a car that you think is beautiful and valuable, that you love. It can happen over time. The video that we're making with Cal OES shows a home that was built in the 60s that is 90% complete on home hardening, but the owner, the executive director for wildfire for Cal OES, he's been doing it for nearly 4 years. So he started with very inexpensive stuff, and then he did something a little bit more expensive. Then he did nothing until he could save some money up. So you don't need to change everything to qualify. You need to take steps to move forward. And for those of you that are on the FAIR plan, you're going to need to be patient. They have about $1 billion in cash and about $5 billion in claims. So there's going to be some action taken in the next several weeks to bolster their cash basis up to about $4 billion. And I'm not sure how the last billion will come together. It might be the state stepping in or who knows what, but those claims will all be paid. It may just take a little while.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much for
David.
your answer.
We have one more question and then we're gonna wind up. So Sharon, you'll be our last question.
Okay, well, this is interesting, and David, great presentation. I just have a question. I don't know if you can answer it, but my question is, I have been privy to several burn scars after we've had fires in the Pacific Palisades, fireworks related, and some homeless warming fires related. LAFD puts out the fire. I have returned to those areas sometimes 3, sometimes 5 days later, and I find hot spots and smoldering and little flames coming out. And of course, I call it in, and they say, "Oh yeah, we'll be down. We'll go ahead and we'll extinguish it again." But to your knowledge, is there protocol for LAFD to revisit these burn scars, like maybe a week or 2 after a fire occurs? And the other question would be, is this built into your committee's protocol? Like, would they go to these areas and double check those areas where they have already burned previously?
It's a very good question. There is a protocol to check in. It doesn't necessarily need to be a fire company. It could be a battalion chief. It could be part of the brush unit. It could even be a CERT volunteer that they send. But it is not a required policy. The proper process, once a fire is extinguished in the WUI, and we're not going to talk about a home, we're going to talk about brush, right? Is to go through a process called cold trailing. That's where you actually turn the soil over, maybe as much as 18 inches deep, to find those hot spots. The fire service refers to clumps of wood that may still be hot or full of embers. They refer to them as pineapples. And they're yellow and they're hot. So that's how they got their name, and they kind of look like a pineapple. But the idea is, to find those before you leave. The challenge in Los Angeles, in the city and in the county, but we'll talk about the city primarily right now, is that there is such a high demand on resources. The LA Fire Department in the year 2000 responded to about 800 calls a day, and they transported about 200 people to hospitals every day. This year, the average call load is 1,860 calls per day. They move 3,700 pieces of apparatus every day. They transport 720 people on average to hospitals every day. And the model right now for fire districts like Fire District 23 or Fire District 69, those districts are not based on fire. They're based on medical emergencies. They need to be able to get anywhere within their district in 5 minutes. We need to make sure that that evolves to be more about fire in fire at-risk areas. We don't necessarily need to have a lot more fire stations. I know we've heard a lot about how we need double the fire stations or 62 fire stations. It's not practical to do that. It is practical, though, to make sure that the fire stations that exist have the proper apparatus and the proper number of firefighters who can respond to those things, and that we give them enough time. And one of the things that could certainly exist is if a fire company needs to get back to its fire station or back on the radio to answer other calls, that someone else can take over. And that may be a volunteer group. In Malibu, there is a volunteer fire brigade. It's actually called the Fire Brigade, and it has an MOU with the LA County Fire Department. We have recommended to Chief Villanueva that he consider that for Los Angeles, so that when a wildfire is extinguished, the firefighters can get back to their calls, and this brigade could take on the responsibility of cold trailing.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. All right, thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time. And Sue, whatever we could do to help you moving forward, we would love to do. We think that you guys are extremely important, and we're ready to help in any way that would be reasonable.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know if everyone's aware, but at the end of February, we had scheduled a day at the park to have a fire safety fair. And obviously that, we didn't, I guess, do that in time. And we'll have to schedule that again when we can figure out a good time and a good place. Because I think it'll be very well attended, probably better. So
Yeah, I think
anyway,
it'll be good. Thank you,
thank
Sue.
you so
Thank you,
much.
everybody.
Thank you, Dante.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
David.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.